In Houston, there lived an Indian doctor. I believe he was a cardiologist, clearly a man of means. He was a nationalist by sentiment, generous with his time and resources for the Indian community around him, but on his own terms. He had made a fortune through his practice, and with that wealth came the desire for relevance in a different arena: opinions, geopolitics, history, current affairs. Suddenly, he was a man with thoughts on everything. He built himself a studio, launched a radio station, and carved out airtime to speak at length about India and the world. Not just once or twice, but evening after evening he pontificated. And he soon had an IPTV channel as well. He became the writer, the anchor, the host, the analyst, and in his own eyes, perhaps the oracle as well. But there was one thing missing: quality. The articulation was clumsy, the insights pedestrian, the language uninspiring, and yet his position within his own linguistic microcosm gave him the immunity from criticism. He drew in a few advertisers, people indulged him, no one dared to say what needed to be said. It wasn't a secret that the city had a lot of brilliant minds, researchers, writers, speakers, and thinkers of depth. The doctor could have had access to all of them, yet, and he had the wealth, the passion, the nationalism, and yet he didn't. Why? Because what he was missing was a vision. Not once did he think of using his resources to build something greater than himself: a platform, a product, a movement that would shift the global discourse in India and Hinduism's favor. Instead, he used his money to amplify his own voice, to feed his own reflection. It was never about the cause, you see, it was always about the mirror. And that, right there, is the affliction that hits at India, and more precisely, the Hindu mind. Those who possess the facts, the means, and the money rarely possess the clarity or humility to serve something larger. Their egos tower over their dharma, their pride outweighs their debt to the civilization that created them. They want to be seen as patriots, not to serve the nation, but to be known for serving it. And that is why our stories remain untold, because those entrusted to carry out the torch would rather polish their nameplates. Welcome to the Drishtikone show, where we go beyond the noise, pierce through the propaganda, and expose the phenomena and actions that others are too afraid to touch or approach. This is not just about politics, you see, it's about rediscovering the truth. Today, we want to look at how India, and specifically the Hindus, lose the narrative wars again and again and again, despite having the most affluent and intelligent people and communities. You see, I've run a solitary campaign for over 2 decades now, a one man effort to research, document, and share detailed treatises on topics that most Indian platforms wouldn't touch. Not because they weren't important, but because they were inconvenient and did not align to any of the news cycles. I could have very well taken the easy path, dummied it all down, chased clicks, and packaged shallow sound bites for profits. It would have been much simpler and far more lucrative. But I chose the harder road, the road of rigor, the depth, and the uncompromising integrity. Every article I wrote was painstakingly researched. Every insight was earned. And yet I didn't lock my work behind paywalls or hoard it for personal gain. I released it under the Creative Commons license, free for use, free for amplification. YouTube channels picked it up. Websites reposted it. Some gave credit, others did not. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the reach. What mattered was the message. That same ethos of substance and collaboration led to a powerful creative partnership with the brilliant Vivek Agnihotri for his brutally honest series on the I Am Buddha platform that he has. Because when he put the truth first, doors open, not for fame, but for impact. There is not an area that I've not looked into. Caste system, the so-called farmers' protests, gaslighting of Hindus, colonial targeting of the Indian and global South, the dangers of technology, big data, and AI, Bengal's history of violating the feminine of for politics, and even the details of what exactly is a deep state. In the last 20 years, I've written close to 8,000 articles, and after a recent change done last year, only a select few have been retained. From the ideological foundations of jihad and the psychology of the Khalistani extremism to how Pakistan secretly acquired its nuclear arsenal, from the anti Brahmin massacres following the Gandhi assassination to silenced horrors of 1947 partition, I have spent tens, perhaps hundreds of thousands of dollars to research, publish, and disseminate these stories for last 20 years, not for applause and certainly not for profit. Because our story, India's and Dharma's story, needed to be told. I've written when no one asked for it. I've spoken when no one listened. Every Sunday morning, I sit down on my desk at 4:30 a.m., irrespective of pain or fever or lack of sleep, with a fire and a few questions. And I look for answers. That is how my newsletter takes shape. Through all this, I built everything without any grants, cliques, or institutional crutches. Recently, I documented the air based strikes that India carried out. I didn't speculate, I consolidated verified facts from multiple sources that I believed were credible and crafted a clear, cohesive account of what would have most likely transpired. The sources that I cited obviously themselves had drawn from a broader matrix. The Maxer satellite imagery, the internal military discussions, the open source intelligence, and the technical analysis. It was a layered reconstruction built not on hearsay, but on accumulated weight of corroborated evidence. And yet, one man whose work was amongst the one that I had used and cited, wrapped in his self-righteous veteran swagger, hurled abuses at me, dismissed my work, and publicly tried to humiliate me. For what? For building on his and others' work to create a more cohesive and comprehensive picture that would make sense to all those who were searching for meaning and confirmation in the face of the media onslaught by our adversaries. One does respect those who have served the country, but no badge, no uniform, and no position gives anyone the right to insult those who fight a different war, the war of ideas. Because every battlefield has its own soldiers and narratives. The war of memory, history, perception are battlefields also. And on this front, India has bled silently for decades. The incredible thing was a response to the video that I had created. It spoke volumes. Veterans, their families, even former generals of our armed forces reached out to acknowledge the depth and the criticality of the analysis that I had presented. It wasn't just another video for them, it was a much needed voice in a vacuum of silence. While the article I had cited, which this gentleman weaponized into a personal grudge, had barely crossed a couple of hundred views, the video I created crossed over 100,000 and counting. The reach was exponential. The message went farther, deeper, and more effectively than anything the original piece could have achieved in isolation. As Voltaire had once put it, the most original writers borrowed from one another. My work was not about creating my own facts or pushing my own opinions in isolation. It's about making sense of the noise. It's about knowing what to trust and what to discard. For every newsletter article where I cite at least 15 to 20 sources of information, be it news articles, books, journals, social media posts, or even YouTube videos, I peruse at least 4 to 5 times those, like those. before solidifying my own thoughts and sharing what I do in my articles. Art of writing is not in what you eventually pen down, but what you discard while coming to the conclusion that you did in the end. That is where the profundity of any writing comes from. Let me share an example. There were two Bollywood songs that I'm sure you all have heard because they were both blockbusters. First is Humne Dekhi Hai Aankhon Ki Mehkti Khushboo, and the other one was the Madhuri Dixit hit Ek Do Teen Char Panch Chhe Saat Aath. Now, remember both of these and say out loudly, honestly, which one of these songs always takes you into your inner mind for hours and makes you reflective? The one that enriches you. The first one, right? Gulzar's Humne Dekhi Hai Aankhon Ki Mehkti Khushboo. Why? Because what Gulzar wrote in those lines was actually a function of what he did not write, the thoughts he discarded to reach to the thoughts he finally penned down. The lines, the words he wrote stood on the shoulders of those words and lines he did not write. That is why his final work is so high in stature. Meanwhile, Samir simply wrote the first thing that came into his mind. No filtering, no profundity, and no reflection. The open source and the Creative Commons movement is built on this understanding that no one thought of a person can get the best out of the creative work. Let the work go out so something more interesting, more profound, and more beautiful can take shape when multiple changes are done to it. Profundity lends criticality to your work. And you know the simple truth? Most Indian commentators, whether they are on television, social media, or behind the defense blogs, make one most fundamental mistake. They think the war ends with the missiles. But the real war begins with a narrative. This is where India's bureaucracy, both in the government and the armed forces, has let themselves down. And everyone down very miserably. There is a great portal that gives amazing details of how powerful India's forces and weapon systems are. That site is IDRW, a defense portal draped in nationalistic flair. There is a reason why you haven't seen much of it from anywhere, you see. Every article ends with a legal threat. Don't quote us, don't share our data or information, or we'll come after you. Really? While China floods timelines with slick propaganda, while Pakistan weaponizes YouTube influencers and ghost accounts, Indian platforms are worried about being cited without credit or proper authorization through the entire red tape. They may think it's some grand strategy, but it's plain and simple hubris conjured up by bureaucratic babu mind. Simply self-repeating hubris. Narrative warfare isn't won by hoarding information in your neat little repositories. No one has a time for that. You know, the Indian establishment, both the civilian and the military, behaves like a rusted mainframe in a world ruled by open source, big data, and AI. Agile creators, anonymous analysts, and amateur sleuths are rewriting the rules of influence. But India's guardians of truth are more worried about attribution than amplification. This kind of possessiveness is not patriotism, it's vanity. The soldier who withholds information because someone else might share it better isn't defending the nation. He's actually defending his own ego. And that is why, time and again, India wins on the battlefield. 1948, 1965, 1971, Kargil, Balakot, and yes, even May 2025. And yet loses in the court of global perception, and very spectacularly at that. Because India's victories are never told. The story never escapes the silo. The facts remain buried under warnings and watermarks. If the goal is to protect the nation's honor, then your insight, no matter how carefully stitched, must be allowed to fly free. If it helps the world understand India's might, Let it go. Let it echo. Let it be reshared 1,000 times over. The one reason why our history of valor and greatness was never shared was because our rulers and colonizers wanted to destroy our own self worth. With all that is being shared in the global media and by the opposition within the country, put yourself in the shoes of a kid 200 years from now reading how India lost the wars from 1948 to 2025 because let's be very clear, it's not your word versus mine, but our word against the global media. And guess what will survive the wars and our vanity? The word that reaches more ears and sets the research precedent for the future. There will be legends and stories of how spectacularly we lost in 2025 and before. After all the work done by our forces. Isn't that the case with our history even now? While Mughal kings had their writers chronicling their times, why weren't the Hindu kings carefully chronicling their own rule? And because there was only one set of chronicles, setting the historical narrative in only one way, the result was unmistakably a shameful tale for the Hindus for so long. So ask yourself honestly, is it any different today? Do you see how our bureaucratic mindset is setting us up as a nation with forces who lost all wars? So if your prime concern is authorship, citation, and credit, then perhaps you weren't a real soldier of Mahabharati to begin with. You were just a guy who loved himself. Were you one who really served the nation or one who wanted to be known for serving it? And know this very clearly, ideas hoarded do not ever become legacies. They rot in silence. If this story helped you understand the geopolitical situation around India and the world better, please subscribe, like, and share. And do click the bell icon, please. Most importantly, tell us in the comments what are your thoughts on why we lose the narratives every victory that we have won on the field. Because, in my view, we probably never had the sagacity and humility to create the messages that we needed. So, how do we create those messages? How do we unite? How do we create something larger and bigger than ourselves? And until next time, Jai Hind.